And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday, and this is our own special Friday protest. Climate Change Roundtable number 89. Cops and Robbers Redux. I'm Jim Lakely, Vice President of the Heartland Institute. I'm your special guest host for today. Anthony Watts, your usual host, is off. He's feeling under the weather instead of being on top of it like he usually is. My understanding is that he contracted a strange virus by eating a bowl of bat soup and some pangolin stew. I warned Anthony to not get his pangolin meat from Costco, but he rarely takes my advice. So feel better soon, Anthony. We're thinking about you. As usual, we have our regular panelists here today, Dr. H. Sterling Burnett. He's the director of Heartland's Arthur B. Robinson Center on Climate and Environmental Policy at the Heartland Institute. Good afternoon, Sterling. How are you today?
Doing well, Jim. Good to be on with you. And happy post-Thanksgiving, pre-Christmas to the entire crew.
Yes. Great time of year this year, for sure.
Got a lot to both celebrate and bemoan with what's going on at COP 28 right now.
Yes, that's the big topic for today. We will certainly be getting to that. It's very interesting. And in fact, our very own Heartland Institute President James Taylor will be traveling to Dubai this evening to be there all next week. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And also with us, of course, is big-time fan favorite, Linnea Lueken. She's a research fellow here for climate and energy policy at the Heartland Institute. Linnea, looking very Christmassy festive. Welcome to the show.
Yep, I caught a little heat for that behind the scenes before the show started, but I'm going to a Christmas fair thing tonight, so I'm just ready for it ahead of time. Everything is good. It was actually cold here for the last couple of days in South Carolina. My friends have told me that I brought the cold weather with me when I came back here after Thanksgiving from Chicago. So it's finally starting to warm up again, getting above the 30s. So that's nice.
Yeah, it was super cold up here in Northern Illinois for the last week. It's actually the cold weather has broken, but the winters here in Chicago are plenty long enough without having it feel like mid-January, late January in the middle of November, which is what it was. I mean, Thanksgiving weekend was very cold here, so things are getting back to normal. Of course, humans control the weather, so we should all feel very guilty, whether it's too hot or too cold or just not exactly perfect the way it's supposed to be.
I was about to say the extreme cold, of course, is more proof of global warming.
Yes, everything is proof of global warming. If your turkey didn't come out good, that's probably on global warming as well. Although my turkey's always perfect, so I don't ever have that problem. So, my turkeys are global or are climate change proof, 100%. Anyway, so we're actually going to have a special guest today. Anthony was kind of a late scratch, as they say in hockey. And so we're going to have a special guest here today. He's actually doing a radio hit, I believe, right now, but he will be joining us midway through the show. And that is the great Steve Milloy. And I'll give him his proper introduction when he does arrive. But before we get into the meat of the show here, I want to ask you all to help support this show and support the Heartland Institute. There's a lot of things you can do. One of them is just to smash that like button, leave comments, share this on social media. All this helps us break through the evil algorithms that channels like YouTube and frankly every social media outlet in the country, or platform, I should say, probably outside of Rumble. It keeps the climate truth that we bring in this show every week away from people. It doesn't recognize it as being, even if you're interested in the topic, it won't show you other videos. We've had videos go viral just because they show up through the algorithm because people are kind of interested in learning information about the climate that goes against the government-driven dogma. So if you share this show, if you hit that like button, if you leave comments, especially, that all helps us kind of break through the barriers that are in place to keep material and shows like this from gaining a lot of traction. And we're always enjoying, the live chat that we have here on YouTube. And so we're going to be looking at your questions later. A lot of people have a lot of fun. They chat and talk to each other. There's a lot of regulars that come on and enjoy being together during this show. So why don't you bring some friends along if you know that they have an interest in this topic, or if you think they should be interested in this topic and learn a lot more about it, that being climate change, bring them along. Let them know that we do this live every Friday at noon Central Time, 1 p.m. Eastern, and they can also have a lot of fun with you in the chat as well. And then lastly, especially during the holiday season, I want to urge the listeners and the viewers of this show to consider becoming a donor to the Heartland Institute itself. I mean, we're a nonprofit think tank. We're a 501c3 organization, so it's a tax-deductible donation to help support not just this program, but we've been a think tank for 40 years, and we're globally known for this topic on promoting climate realism around the world. And we cannot do that without the support of, we have thousands of supporters from literally all over the country and some internationally that want to support, bringing climate truth to the world. So if you are not currently a Heartland donor, I hope you will go to heartland.org. It's very easy to find the donor button up there on the top right. And I hope you will consider, especially in the holiday giving season, and some people are trying to, frankly, give money away before for tax purposes before the end of the year. This is a fantastic organization to support, and we hope we can count on yours in the very near future.
Yeah, get that tax credit on your tax bill.
Yes, that's always good.
Tax write-off.
Tax
Andy, what are you
write-off, yes. All right. Well, yesterday, COP28, that's the Conference of the Parties, the annual United Nations 2-week orgy of grift, delusion, and climate lies. It's kicking off in Dubai. We're going to get to that circus in just a moment, but let's just kick off the show, which I think is one of Anthony's favorite features, like we always do, the craziest climate stories of the week. And as usual, there is a ton to choose from. We're going to go first, Andy, to this story from, where is it? There it is, from the Center Square. And this is a study done by our friends over at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Cost of fueling an electric vehicle is equivalent to $16.33 per gallon. You look at the story here. The complete cost of fueling an electric vehicle for 10 years are $17.33 per equivalent gallon of gasoline, according to a new analysis by the Texas Public Policy Foundation. The study's authors say that a $1.21 cost per gallon equivalent of charging a car cited by EV advocates excludes the real costs that are borne by taxpayers for subsidies, utility ratepayers for energy investments, and electric vehicle owners for mandate and environmental credit-driven higher vehicle costs, which they say total $48,698 per EV. And these costs have to be included when comparing fueling costs for EVs versus traditional gas-powered vehicles. And Jason Isaac, who we've had on this program, I believe, and also in the Tank, which is the Heartland Institute's flagship podcast over on the Stopping Socialism TV channel, he says that the market would be driving towards hybrids if not for this market manipulation from the federal government. We'd be reducing emissions and improving fuel economy at the same time on a much greater scale, Jason Isaac said. Guys, I once, Cameron Schulte runs our government relations department here at the Heartland Institute. And we went out to lunch, and he has a hybrid vehicle. And as we were going, and the battery would come on as we go, and then it wouldn't. And I had the discussion. It's like, if the environmental left was actually interested in what they say they're interested in, which is reducing CO2 emissions from personal vehicles, they would be embracing and improving hybrid technology, and not going full EV, because as we're going to be talking about in this podcast, and we do in a lot of podcasts, EVs are not remotely environmentally friendly. And they're also very expensive to boot, as this study shows.
We had Jason on just a couple of weeks ago to discuss his study. It's a real eye opener to see what the true cost of these things are. The true cost is 3 or 4 times what you're actually being charged for them at the bill, but the rest of it's being paid by all of us. But I'm going to disagree with Jason a little bit. Imagine that, me disagreeing with somebody. I don't think if the market were allowed to function, even hybrids would be selling that much. Hybrids are also government supported. They have been. In the end, people care about a lot of things more than fuel economy, except when gas prices are really, really, really high. And even then, there's very little elasticity of demand. They care about comfort. They care about towing capacity. They care about how many people they can pack in. They care about, can you run your air conditioner and get on the freeway at the same time without taking 20 seconds on the ramp. My mother has a hybrid. The batteries are not much cheaper when they go out. Your car is basically worth nothing when the batteries go out. You can't sell it for what it would cost to replace the batteries. I just think if the market were allowed to function, people would still be driving. Well, they'll still be driving what they already are driving, which is the Ford F-150, the best-selling passenger vehicle, not pickup truck, passenger vehicle in America for, I believe, 20 years running. People, I'm not saying they don't care about fuel economy, they do, but it's not the most important feature. And if it is, for those that it is, hybrids are an option, but so are 40-mile-per-gallon Toyotas and other things that already get high fuel economy. The government doesn't have to get into it at all.
Right. I mean, if people, that's the thing. People, well, you know, I'm old enough, and so are you, Sterling, old enough to remember, you know, there were a lot of more fuel, cars with higher fuel economy became popular in the late 70s and especially in the early 80s because gasoline was expensive. There was people were still remembering the oil embargo. And so the market drove the idea that people wanted to drive vehicles that were much more energy efficient. Linnea, I want to throw this to you. There was a part in this story that I just remembered I wanted to read out loud before. And it's below the great graphic there that shows that how much more expensive over time an electric vehicle actually is. But this, the study also assumes that EVs will be driven for 10 years and 120,000 miles, which the authors claim is a very generous estimate. According to J.D. Power, EVs lose 2.3% of their range each year due to battery degradation. That's probably a pretty conservative estimate. In part, driving EVs to lose value even faster than internal combustion cars. You know, they say that your car, when you buy a new car, it starts losing value the instant you drive it off the lot. And it would seem to me that the ability of your electric vehicle's battery to power that vehicle also diminishes immediately when you drive off the lot.
Well, it really is, you know, something of a different animal when it comes to the fully electric vehicles, because it's such a large battery pack that you need to replace when it does start degrading like that. Not everyone can afford just to make that replacement. And so I can't cite a particular study, but there have been some investigations that have found that most people, when they get to the point where they need to replace their EV battery, they just get rid of the car. So it's 10 years is probably pretty generous. I think most people tend to trade in their cars unless they're really attached to it earlier than that anyway. I would guess. Sorry, my dog is making noise. I would guess that probably it's more like 6 years for like a gas powered car. But yeah, I don't know. It's they were being very nice to EVs to make that estimate, and it still doesn't end up panning out very well for them. So we know that the cost is actually a lot worse, and the EV owner probably isn't the one paying the majority of that cost, so they probably don't care. A lot of this is probably getting passed off onto other electricity consumers and taxpayers.
Yeah, I think the chances of an electric vehicle lasting 10 years and 120,000 miles is zero. I don't think there's any way a vehicle would ever last that, an electric vehicle with current technology would ever last that long.
The virtues of hybrids vis-a-vis electric is that if your battery pack goes out in your hybrid, you can still drive it because it does have an engine.
That's true.
Um,
That's
it-
what I mean. Yeah,
but that doesn't mean it's going to. If you have a choice, you're going to choose hybrid over a regular gasoline vehicle.
Right.
Another huge drawback that we haven't discussed of electric vehicles. I've had many vehicles. I've actually had one. The very first car I ever owned actually caught fire when I was driving it. It had a vacuum leak near the fuel line. Gas got sucked in and fire erupted. I have never, ever had a vehicle catch fire sitting in my driveway or parked at a grocery store and I've had motorcycles. None of them have ever exploded and caught fire and killed people in a tenement building.
Right.
That's a problem unique to EVs, just spontaneous combustion.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, there he is.
Hey, there's
Hello,
Steve,
Steve
hey.
Milloy.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
As promised
Hey,
to
can I
our.
comment on this?
Yeah, sure. I should introduce you first. I should let people know who you are. I mean,
Well,
I know you
it
have
says
your,
right
you have a
there.
li-
Steve
you have a label there,
Milloy,
climate hoax killer. Yeah, climate hoax killer. Okay, so Steve Milloy is a climate hoax killer. He's also the founder of junkscience.com, and he's someone that the journal Nature calls, quote, perhaps the most influential climate science contrarian. But as we all know, the scientific journals and climate are all hopelessly corrupt, and you can't believe anything you read in them. So you still have that on your resume, Steve.
Absolutely. So I heard someone talking about hybrids. I think it was Sterling. And I just want to make it clear that I oppose everything and anything that advances the climate hoax in any way, shape, or form. EVs, hybrids, even people like Bjorn Lomborg and Michael Schoenberger, who are like, lightweight skeptics. None of this stuff is good. We need to just kill the climate hoax and not defend it and say there's a better way to do it. Yesterday, Lomborg had a piece in the Wall Street Journal about cost-benefit analysis for climate. It's all made up. So that's my intro.
All right. Well, way to hit the ground running, Steve, as fully expect you to do. Thanks for being on the show again. And we'll hope to have you on a lot more too. You're a lot of fun. Well, speaking of climate hoax, and if you don't like electric cars, Steve, you really hate electric buses. Because our next story is, and I know Sterling's a big fan of them too. Edmonton's fleet of electric buses failing amid manufacturers' bankruptcy proceedings. The problems with Proterra buses have cost the city more than $1 million. Edmonton doesn't seem to me like a city that could just blow off $1 million, but who knows?
Proterra is the company that's already gone, right?
Yeah, it's already bankrupt. Yeah, it's gone. So yeah. So in the summer of 2020, the mayor of Edmonton announced that electric buses will be deployed in the city's transit service. Now, for those of you who don't know, Edmonton is in Alberta, Canada, and it's extremely cold there. They love hockey, which they probably start playing in August outside. So it's pretty cold. Anyway, 3 years later, most of the city's 60 electric buses aren't fit to be on the roads. And complicating the situation is the fact that the manufacturers in bankruptcy proceedings in the United States, they were promised to be quiet, super efficient, and particularly efficient financially. And now we're at the point where, what did it say? None of the buses are, most of the buses are not even fit to be on the roads. They probably still have new bus smell in them, and they still stink.
Let's be clear. What was the headline of that story again? I thought the headline, told the lie perfectly.
It is Edmonton's fleet of electric buses failing amid manufacturers' bankruptcy proceedings. Yeah.
As if the manufacturer's bankruptcy proceedings has anything whatsoever to do with the buses failing.
Right.
The bus is failing because the technology is bad, not because Proterra is particularly a bad manufacturer of electric vehicles. Electric vehicles, cars, trucks, buses don't work very well in extreme weather situations. They don't hold their charge. They didn't do it in San Francisco when San Francisco did it. They didn't do it in Connecticut when Connecticut did it. Edmonton is even worse.
Of course it is.
So the fact, what cost Edmonton all this money is not that Proterra went bankrupt, is that they spent so much money on idiot technologies. Every one of these battery-powered buses probably cost $100,000 or $200,000 more than a diesel or even a natural gas fueled bus. They could have saved all that money plus all the repair costs, which, well, they're not getting repaired, right? So they sunk a lot of money into a poor technology to virtue signal. And now they want to say, oh, well, if only the manufacturer hadn't gone bankrupt.
Yeah. Yes. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I got to say, I like electric buses. And the reason I like them is because they cost twice as much and they don't work. And then my favorite part of electric buses, there's a video of a whole line of German electric buses. One caught on fire, then they all caught on fire.
Yeah.
And so this is a great education. It's a learning moment, a teaching moment for the climate hoax.
Yeah, 100% right. 100% right. I saw the other day, I think New York City was doing a pilot project with electric garbage trucks and snow plows. And it was there's the video of the electric buses bursting into flames. Yeah, but Linnea, oof, wow, that's pretty dramatic. I don't know.
By the way, nobody's there with a torch. There's no arsonist involved. They were just sitting there.
Climate.
Well, if you don't have exact fare, I mean, that's what you get. So,
Right.
yeah, I think the only thing that would be dumber than electric buses in Edmonton would be electric snowplows and garbage trucks in Edmonton. But they tried it in New York City. And as much as they wanted a virtue signal, as much as they wanted to will it into existence, just make it happen, they cut bait on that garbage.
Do you want to know what's terrible about that one?
Go ahead, Linnea. Go ahead.
We covered that story on climate realism a couple weeks ago, and what the worst part of that story is that New York uses garbage trucks as snowplows when they have a bad snowstorm.
Right.
And they work on like 12-hour shifts when they are doing snow removal in New York, and especially in Manhattan. They have to get those roads cleared. It's too important to the economy, and with all those bridges and stuff, they have to get it done for safety and for economics. So these electric buses fitted to be snowplows couldn't make 2 hours before they had to be recharged when they were doing this pilot program. And the company, I think GM made them, it was Mac that made them,
Mac.
said, told New York, this is a bad use of these vehicles. They can't do it. Don't do that. Don't do this. It's not going to work. And New York said, nah, we're just going to do it. But even worse than that is they didn't cancel the project after it failed like that. They're replacing their public fleet with electric vehicles anyway, including the garbage trucks and the snowplows, even though they only get less than a 2-hour runtime off of the charge. It's unbelievable how much they're willing to do to pursue this virtue signaling when the function, obviously, there is no function. It doesn't actually work for what they need it to work for.
Let's be clear. The 2-hour runtime. So in New York, it'll take them 15 to 30 minutes or more to get to where they're having to plow from where they're stationed. And then the power starts going down. So they got to get back real quick before the power runs out, or the damn vehicle is on the side of the road. And someone has to run out with a diesel charger to charge it on site.
Right. Well, they have to use diesel chargers anyway, because a lot of times you lose power to the city when there's a big snowstorm. At least in my experience living in Illinois, if we had a big major snow event, then, there was always a tree or something that would fall on the power lines and put out the power for your neighborhood. Imagine that, all of a sudden now all of your diesel or your electric garbage truck plows can't even get charged without using extra diesel generators.
For just a minute, let's go back to the buses. You saw that explosion. I want our audience to think about this. You saw that explosion. Now, I know a lot of kids who take buses to school, and I'm not talking about school buses. They get on public buses and go to school. There are other kids in school buses, and increasingly the federal government is encouraging localities to buy electric school buses. I don't want kids on those buses.
Right. Yeah. Well, Steve Milloy, if electric vehicle failures make you happy, you are living in Happy Town for the next year or so. And I love how it is also a dumpster fire as well as a bus fire because it ignited the dumpsters as well.
Yeah, no, these are great public education campaigns that the blue states are conducting for us. They're wasting their money. They're having disasters. The tragic part of this is that there's been a rash of e-bike explosions over the last couple of years because e-bikes have really gotten popular. And, it's not, comical like these German buses just burning. They're tragic because people are dying.
Yes.
I think just a couple weeks ago, there was an e-bike fire, killed a mother and 2 sleeping children.
In New York.
Yeah.
In New York.
And so these are tragedies that are, you talk about man-made. This is a man-made tragedy. I mean, what's the point of an e-bike? And when I was growing up in the 70s and I had grown up by the 80s, but in the 70s, I think the CPSC, Consumer Product Safety Commission, had banned lawn darts because a couple of people had been killed. Well, a lot more than a couple of people have been killed by e-bikes, yet no ban.
Well, and it's especially strange too because electric scooters and bikes and stuff have existed for forever. I mean, they've been around for a long time, and they didn't have this particular problem until recently. But it must be the new battery. It has to be the the lithium-ion battery, because, and also I've heard someone argue that people are trying to do modifications on them so that they have a higher top speed. And stuff like that, and people do that to electric golf carts all the time. I've seen that happen, and I haven't seen them catch on fire. So obviously there is a new technology that's out right now that is clearly not safe for public use, and should be looked into and probably pulled. But they don't seem to be wanting to do that.
This is the thing, Linnea. I mean, it's green technology, so no one's going to look into it. I mean, the Consumer Product Safety Commission's got to be aware of it. I mean, they were right on lawn darts. But, this stuff is so politically correct that they're not going to touch it.
It's because they hate fun, Steve.
Look, there's a phone catching off. Look, it's precisely what Linnea said. It's the battery. Look,
that's right. Why they don't allow you to have your computers and phones in the belly of an airplane, because this could happen. That's why you have to have it out.
There's scooters. There's been battery scooters for a long time. There have been battery golf carts, of course. Battery, I want to say RVs, recreational vehicles, but I don't mean, like Polaris and Kawasaki four-wheelers. They have traditional lead batteries, and they work. And they don't catch fire. These, I think in New York, I think I read, Steve, a few weeks ago, maybe a couple of months, that lithium-ion battery fires in scooters, trucks, and cars, it's not just killing the people that own them, it's catching other people's houses on fire.
Yeah.
Have surpassed every other source of fires that we respond to in New York.
Yeah. Now, imagine this happens in the like basement garage of an apartment building or an office building downtown someplace. I mean, it's just disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah. Well, it has, and they've had to get people out, and they've not been able to replace the buildings. And the things are so heavy, they're destroying the nation's roads, but they're not paying to keep the roads up, right? You don't have the gas tax paying things, but they're so heavy, they're putting more wear and tear on the roads.
Well, and parking garages are designed for regular cars, not these heavier EVs. So if everyone has an EV, oh my God, garages are going to collapse.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it just struck me, that video of the guy spraying it with the water hose, because you shouldn't do that for a battery fire. No one's going to be trained on that. No one knows that you can't use water to put out a battery like a lithium fire.
No, if that starts in your house, you just got to get out.
Yeah.
You can't fight that. You can't fight that on your own. No way. It's not, it's not like a kitchen fire. That's not going to happen. So
it also has emissions that aren't good for you, right? When they've had when they in Australia had one of a fire at a Tesla battery plant. I'm not talking about a plant where they make the batteries. I'm talking about a power plant. They had to let it burn because they didn't have the safety gear necessary to get in there and fight the fire.
Yeah. If these things were, I'm not a big advocate for banning things, but if these things weren't mandatory basically made mandatory by governments and subsidized by taxpayers, they would be banned. There's no way you would allow this kind of, with that kind of safety risk, there's no way you would allow those cars in multi-car garages and all of that sort of stuff. It's just absurd.
Any other technology that had this many...
Go ahead, Sterling.
Any other technology that had this kind of profile as far as danger, that had already killed as many people as it has, very publicly, very visibly, you don't have to guess about whether it's the cause, that threatened so many lives, it would have been pulled from the market already. Any other technology, any other product.
The whole green agenda is about promoting things that are dangerous to people, if not just to kill you. Think of bike riding and encouraging people to ride bikes with cars. I mean, that's insane. This stuff, which blows up, causes fires, kills people. We also have, there's a great op-ed or editorial in today's Wall Street Journal about how New York State almost, catastrophically lost power last winter because of the green agenda. And I mean, this whole agenda is just built on disaster and danger. It's awful.
Yep. Well, the whole point of it, Steve, is because we can change the weather if we just do what we're told by Marxists. So to that end, let's check in and see how it's going. In our show notes today, there's a tweet from our friend Ryan Maui from a couple days ago, and it's a map of the temperatures of Europe, and it says, as the major global warming summit begins, Europe will be going into its second week of deep freeze and getting colder. Yeah. Good luck with all of that. Steve, if doing what Marxists say, if living our lives in their virtuous imagination is supposed to make the world better, why isn't it happening? Why is it so darn cold early in Europe?
Imagine if they can do for weather what they've done for electric buses. It's somehow going to cost twice as much, not work, and we're all gonna die. Right? Well, it's crazy.
I think they should take credit for the freeze, the things that we've already done. There's a reason
it's working.
It's so cold in Europe. It's working.
Year.
People are freezing to death rather than burning up.
That is not the hottest year. I'm sorry. And in the U.S., it's been very cold this week. I live in Washington, D.C. It's very cold here. I know it's worse in Chicago. Is that the hottest year?
That's what they say, Steve. You don't believe them? You think they might be fibbing? You think they might have an agenda instead of giving us real science? How dare you, sir?
Dallas, Texas last week was 10 degrees colder than the norm for the season.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure now that we're having this unusual cold, they're kind of cursing under their breath because, this will add up for their yearly average. Because they've been going all summer. They've been going month by month. This is the hottest month ever. No, this is the hottest month ever. And it's all hotter by like 0.01.
Right.
Very slim margins if their data is correct at all. And if it is colder than normal this month and into the next, then boohoo, I guess.
I noticed they didn't host the climate conference this year in Helsinki in December. A person could dream of a winter snowstorm striking the UAE right now or Dubai.
Yeah,
that would be beautiful. That they had to cancel the conference but it's not going to happen in Dubai. But if they had held it in Edmonton or Helsinki or Edmonton would have been beautiful because then they couldn't have gotten around without the public transportation that wasn't working. But
Sterling, they're having their own sort of Al Gore effect this year. It's not really with the weather, but it's with the president of the COP conference is the CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, and he's using his position to sell oil. So it's kind of like the Al Gore effect, not quite, but
and aren't they also the ones that bought Al Gore's television station from him?
Well, that's right.
They are.
TV. That's
I believe that they are the ones that bought his television station.
I
funded by oil money.
That's right. Yep. And so Al Gore got rich on oil money. Oh,
of course. Yeah. No.
Yes. Well, speaking of weather predictions, in our notes here today, we'll work through this. There's a story from 11 years ago. And it's relevant that it's from 11 years ago. And it's titled, This is from September 17th, 2012. Why are we reading a story that old? Well, it's because this story said Arctic expert predicts final collapse of sea ice within 4 years. Professor Peter Wadhams, I'm sure you're familiar with him, Steve Milloy. He's one of the world's leading ice experts, and he predicted the final collapse of the Arctic sea ice in summer months within 4 years. Says it's going to be a global disaster, and it's now unfolding in the northern latitudes. Blah, blah, blah. In an email to The Guardian, he says, climate change is no longer something we can aim to do something about in a few decades' time, and that we must not only urgently reduce CO2 emissions, but must urgently examine other ways of slowing global warming, such as the various geoengineering ideas that have been put forward. Well, wouldn't you know it? I have a feeling that the sea ice, it might have made news this summer, Steve, if there was absolutely no sea ice in the Arctic. I don't remember seeing stories like that.
Yeah, no, I think the sea ice was basically the same as the year before. I mean, the hottest year didn't really have any sort of effect in the Arctic. Of course, I think Al Gore was one of the first to predict this in 2007, 2008. He predicted the Arctic might be ice-free as early as 2013 and 2014. He was wrong. They're always wrong. Every prediction any of these guys has ever made has always been wrong. And I'm not surprised because, as we learned through ClimateGate, the science has been completely rigged in this. As we've learned from the great Anthony Watts, temperatures are completely bogus. What I recommend to everyone is, I think it was last month in October, maybe, these old retired statisticians from Norway Statistics did a report on what they thought about climate alarmism, and they really took it apart. And just basically described how the data and statistics are really lousy. We have no idea what's going on, yet we've created this entire, or they've created this entire hoax, which they keep promoting, and they're never held accountable for it.
Yeah, I reported on that Climate Change Weekly about probably 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah,
that report is an important report, but the sea ice thing, the sea ice has been relatively flat for more than a decade. It waxes and wanes. It always has. It goes away in the summer or declines in the summer, and it expands during the winter. Recently, it has increased faster during the fall than it has for the average for the past decade in this year. It did the same last year. Sea ice hasn't gone anywhere. And when they started measuring it and started all these alarming calls, I mean, you could have pulled up an old New York Times article. I think it was titled "The End of Snow." That's more than a decade. I think it's 2007, 2008 that came out. What they find is they started measuring the sea ice, the ones they want to talk about, the measurements they want to talk about, from a very high point. Historically, they estimate that going into the late 1990s, early 2000s, sea ice had reached an extent that it hadn't been for the entire century. It had grown and grown and grown. And so if you choose a high point to start your statistics from, to start collecting data, and the high point just doesn't sustain itself forever or keep going up, then you go, oh my God, the world's ending. The sea ice is declining. But what happened is it plateaued, it went down, and now it has set a new sort of plateau.
Yeah. So that's really interesting, Sterling, because
the
satellite era started in 1979, which is when they started monitoring sea ice, and that just also happened to be the tail end of the 20th century global cooling.
Yep.
And so you had maximum sea ice, and then that's when they start monitoring, and of course it's all downhill from there. But we don't know what was on the other side of 1979, and it's really hard to compare. Tony Heller has done a great job of going through early 20th century newspapers and finding reports about Arctic ice and predictions of gloom and doom from the 1920s and 1930s. So it's really dishonest that they started in 1979 and pretend that, this is all because of emissions. I mean, 1979, the end of that little ice, the 20th century cooling is also the beginning of the series of El Niños, which have been driving warming since, to the extent there's been any, since 1980. So, it's a really an inflection point in recent climate history, and not all that. They only care about what happened after, and they misrepresent it, and it's nuts.
Well, and let's be clear though, sea ice loss should be expected, right? Like if we're exiting a major glaciation period, then I would imagine that the glaciers should be retreating and that you should be hoping that they are, instead of doing the opposite of that. There's this weird kind of ethos that seems to be common on the climate alarmist side, which is that Earth is supposed to be in stasis. Like,
Right.
and of course the smarter ones will, say no, it's because we think that it's more, that it's accelerating beyond anything that's ever happened before, so it's dangerous and you don't know what's going to happen. And I understand that perspective. I think they're wrong, but I understand that. But there are some that are very like, it shouldn't be moved. The ice should not be going anywhere, no matter what, ever. It should be exactly the way it was in the 1970s when I was a kid, or we should have exactly the same average weather as it was. But the Earth has never been in stasis.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't expect it to be. And so the way that they take advantage of this is that they use that false kind of perspective that we have, that I think really comes from some of our, and Michael Crichton talked about this in State of Fear, our idea about how you do nature preservation, trying to keep a landscape exactly the way that you found it. It's basically impossible without like super aggressive management, because anytime anything ever happens, it's going to change. Another species comes in and it changes the landscape in one way or another. Bison terraforming basically the entire plains.
Yes, it's constant intervention. It's constant intervention.
Yeah, you have to aggressively manage that, and that's what they've learned up in Yellowstone. So I think that that's kind of the way that they're looking at the whole planet now.
Well,
is that they want to keep it exactly the way it is right now. It cannot change.
It comes
but that's
from, we have a field now that hasn't been a science for hundreds of years or even more than 100 years. The field of ecology came about in the late 60s, early 70s. And the early ecology, it's now debunked, but the early ecologists believed there was something called a climax community, where it was sort of an Aristotelian view of communities. You reach your final form and then it just sort of stays there. And of course, that's not how ecosystems work. They're constantly churning and turning over. They do go through stages, and then they reach the climax community and a fire comes along, or a freeze, and it starts all over again. Or a different thing comes along, like ice coming down, scraping the surface in the form of ice glaciation, and then it starts all over again when they retreat. But the point is, there's never been a so-called climax community. There's never been a stasis on Earth anywhere. It's only relative to people's short lifespans that they feel like these things have gotten weird. So if you look back since the last glaciation, since the last ice age, there's good evidence, proxy data, where they find shells and different things, that the sea ice and that the ice glaciers were much smaller 6,000-7,000 years ago than they are today. So they've grown and now they're retreating. But there were no power plants back then.
6,000 years ago, the Alps were ice-free. Sterling, I think you raised a good point. And nothing that you said there was rocket science, and especially people like James Hansen and Michael Mann, and pick the PhD climate alarmist you want. They should know this, and they do know it, but they don't care and they lie. And I think Linnea also hit, she said that the key word she said was control. This is all about controlling. If you can convince people that, we can go back to the days of yesteryear when they imagined things were better, and just give me control and we'll make it all better. And that's what they're trying to do. Yeah.
If you look at, you don't have to study all the science to understand that it was obviously colder in the past than it is today, and that is a natural thing. There's paintings of a frozen Thames River and people ice skating on it. That was not pulled out of the imagination. That was happening. And so that's why they painted it. And if you can be not even a high school level educated, you can not even have finished high school and understand, the Thames never freezes now. So it must have been colder back then, and we didn't have any cars. I mean, that's why I think they're losing this debate. This is despite constant propaganda from basically cradle to grave of people in the West. They still can't get a majority of people agreeing that humans are responsible for warming the planet and that government needs to do something to stop it. You can lie, but science and common sense and observation eventually smacks you in the face.
Almost certainly every year, but it's often more often. Scientists are finding areas where they find civilizations, entire roads, and things like arrowheads and baskets and clothing that has been under ice for hundreds and thousands of years.
How'd it get there?
That meant it was ice-free back then when those people dropped that stuff.
Right.
When they abandoned their homes in those regions, when those roads were given up, those trade routes were given up because the ice came. But before the ice came, it was warmer and they were traveling and living there.
Right.
That happened, folks. And it's at almost every month you're finding a new report on this stuff where things that have not been seen for 7,000 years. Well, what does that tell you about what was happening 7,000 years ago?
But Sterling, it's funny because when they write those stories, they pretend that it wasn't warmer back then, that the melting has revealed this, and that is proof of melting. Well, of course it is, but it's not what they're trying to prove. All you got to do is think, well, how did this thing get there in the first place?
Yeah.
Magic. Climate magic.
Even more recently, when they find like World War II airplanes that crashed in the Arctic, right?
Yeah.
And they're under ice. Well, hold it. So from the 40s to the late 70s, there was a measurable cooling, and scientists were warning, the next ice age is coming. Well, now it's melting again, and they're finding these airplanes. It's like, okay, that means that they were retreated farther back then.
Right. Well, see, this is why we send James Taylor to Dubai, the UAE, to walk around with placards. Like the crazy old guy with the end is near sign. On the corner, the street corner. That's not going to be James. James is going to be carrying a sign that says the end is not near. It's all going to be fine. It's it's going to be quite a lot of fun again with our friends at CFACT as well. Craig Rucker's been a guest on this program, so maybe we'll have both those guys come give us a debrief from the land of crazies. But speaking of that, we are probably going to go a little long today, but we shouldn't go 3 hours long. So let's get into the main topic here at the 48-minute mark. Andy, there's a story here for the BBC. Steve, let's not rip on the COP completely. It's not a complete and total waste of time. It apparently is a great place to make oil and gas deals because so something useful is coming out of this after all. So one of the things I've really enjoyed, I subscribe to emails from the climate writers at the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Guardian and other places. And they've been very upset the last week, 10 days, when they learned that, first of all, they were not comfortable with the climate conference being held in a petrol state like the UAE, but also that they were aghast that the sultans who run that country and run their energy industry were using this global meeting to set up great deals for exporting, importing, and exchanging in the fossil fuel market out there. So they kind of denied that it's happening, but they kind of half-assed their denial. And they're using COP to make deals. And this is good news, guys, because that means perhaps the virtue signaled complete collapse of the global energy market and our power around the world actually won't happen, because there are some people out there that are still going to make sure that we have affordable energy, at least in some places on Earth.
Yeah, so it's funny today. The CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company and COP28 president, Sultan Al Jaber or something like that, he announced that Abu Dhabi was going to be contributing $30 million to this climate fund. Well, what the climate fund is, it's going to be an investment pool managed by BlackRock. And I can imagine what they're thinking of doing is, marketing Abu Dhabi oil. Possibly the climate angle is to displace coal in Africa and replace it with Abu Dhabi gas. But of course, in the end, and this is somehow supposed to reduce emissions, but of course, in the end, it will only increase emissions. Just like in the United States, we have gotten rid of coal, but our emissions have been increasing.
That story, they're aghast. I mean, I love the way Jim put it. They're aghast. They're shocked that oil deals were going on in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai. It reminded me, the first time I saw the headline, it reminded me of that great scene in Casablanca, where the cop raids the bar, Rick's Cafe, right? And yep. He says, what are you shutting me down for? He says, I'm shocked to discover gambling going on here. And the waiter goes up, "You're winning, sir." And he goes, "Oh, thank you very much." Yeah. They're shocked that an oil sheikdom would make oil deals while everybody's there. You can't make
the guy's probably making deals all the time. I mean, he has denied what they've accused him of. It's just probably his normal. He's the CEO of an oil company. He makes deals every day. Of course, some of it is going to happen while he's doing cop stuff. The whole thing is just kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, we're going to be getting to questions, but yeah, I mean, I do think that is the good news, that it's not a complete waste of time. I mean, somebody's getting something out of it, other than all the kleptocrats and all the grift that's going on. Somebody's doing some actual business deals. So
and we're going to get more emissions. So, yay!
Yeah, we need to warm the world.
There are some green groups that are trying to boycott the conference because they say it's so bad that all these deals are going on and everything. But it seems like most of the world leaders who really enjoy the nice banquet dinners and stuff are just completely ignoring them.
Yeah, and boycott, they're not even allowed in to start with.
Right. By boycott, what does the boycott mean? Does that mean they're not going to show up and be at the second section, the other area where all the NGOs are? I'll wager they're there, but if they're not, well, at least they're then living up to their, what they say is important. They didn't fly in jets to get over there, and they're not having 4-star meals. But my suspicion is they're there.
Yeah. Well, I'm boycotting being cast as the lead in the next Marvel superhero movie. I will not do it under any circumstances. So in the same way. All right. So,
brave, Jim.
Stunning and brave. That's me. So, there are some deals that apparently will be made. And of course, they're going to be made by the Biden administration. They're going to, of course, hurt the United States. There's a story here from the Daily Caller. The U.S. backing a new plan to cripple coal industry at UN climate conference. Leave it to the Biden administration to get the worst out of this conference. After all, right. They are seeking. They're set to back a plan that would crush the coal industry at the upcoming climate summit. Reuters reported on Tuesday. The Biden administration will reportedly support a French plan to get the countries of the world to ban private financing of coal-fired power plants during the upcoming COP28. The plan is likely to drive a rift between countries like the U.S. and France and those like China and India, which are reliant on coal to feed their economies. Cheap and reliable energy. Guys, this is actually serious. This is serious news and not very good news that I guess codifying into some sort of international agreement, something that they kind of are doing on the sly, and that is destroying the coal industry in America while letting China and India burn dirtier coal and do whatever they like.
I think it's a joke, Jim. I think you're wrong. I think it's a joke.
You think it's a joke?
Let me explain why.
Okay.
Let me explain why. You said it. We're going to ban private financing. Well, first off, the UN's climate conference has no reach in private banks in these countries unless the governments endorse it. Secondly, most of the financing of coal is being done by governments. It doesn't touch China's big development funding. It doesn't touch India's big development funding that are funded by the government. That's not private finance. That's the government saying, we will use more coal. So, once again, it's another thing they said, we walked away. We've signed a big treaty. There'll be no more private finance. But governments are doing most of the funding.
All right. Am I wrong?
You know, so I worked in the coal industry for a number of years. And we used Goldman Sachs. Does that mean Goldman Sachs is not going to be allowed to finance U.S. coal operations? I mean, 20% of our electricity is still provided by coal. If they have no access to banking in the United States, is that what Biden is trying to do? I mean, that sounds unconstitutional.
Isn't that what DEI stuff is, Linnea? Guys, isn't that, part of it is that there's the debanking stuff that kills the planet? Isn't that a real movement? Doesn't this give momentum to it?
Well, that's exactly what ESG is supposed to be doing. We've talked about that on In the Tank. We've talked about that here. The whole debanking issue. If you're a company that says the wrong thing on Twitter, or if you are involved in the fossil fuel industry, then they're going to find a way to convince banks to not invest in your projects or to not give you loans. It's happening, but I think Sterling might be right on this one. I really don't think that Biden's going to be able to do anything actually with this. He might talk about it a bunch. He'll go and he'll read off something that's where he gets to say, we are planning to stop dirty coal, blah, blah, blah. And then everyone will applaud, and then he'll walk off the stage and go eat pudding or whatever it is that he does. and then it'll be gone from the news cycle in like a week, and no one will ever talk about it again.
He'll stumble on the way to the children's table to eat his pudding. So if Goldman, first off, like I said, they still have to pass domestic law to get this done. Secondly, does anyone believe she can shut down coal plants in the U.S.? He's doing it already. I'm not talking just the U.S. Biden can do a lot of bad things in the U.S. I'm talking globally. They're talking about ending coal use. That's not going to end coal use. But my suspicion is, even here in the U.S., will we have coal plants? They're going down already. But will we have coal mining and shipping to overseas? My suspicion is China might get in the game to finance continued coal production here, or India might. And are we going to stop that? Are we going to tell them no? Because if we do, if I were China's dictators, I might say, well, okay, maybe you don't need our graphite, or you don't need our rare earth minerals if we can't get coal. If we can't run our economy the way we want to, and you want to restrict us, then you can't have what you say you want and need. In the end, Biden and France don't control the world, and they don't control global coal production.
All right. Well, it's not easy to talk me off the ledge on this kind of stuff. I get a little worked up. So I'll take one step back, and maybe this next story will have me take 2 steps back, because we have talked on the In the Tank podcast and others on how the environmental left is convinced that modern farming, especially the raising and slaughtering of animals for meat, is probably the worst thing we can do. Everything's the worst thing we can do. And that's, I guess, the newest worst thing we can do. Flying is bad. Driving cars is bad. And now eating steaks are bad. However, I see here from this story from The Guardian of all places that there are plans to present meat as sustainable nutrition at COP28, and that the industry intends to go full force in arguing that meat is beneficial to the environment at the COP. And so I'm guessing The Guardian doesn't like this news, so it's but it's presenting it as a warning. Big meat companies and lobby groups are planning a large presence at the COP. The files show that the world's largest meat company, JBS, is planning to come out in full force at the summit, along with other big industry hitters, such as the Global Dairy Platform and the North American Meat Institute. And so, they're going to be pushing the idea that is common sense. And I'm actually really glad to see this. Steve Milloy, I know you probably share this frustration that industries that have influence and have power to protect their industries from environmental nut jobs trying to shut it down, trying to make our way of life worse, seem to just sit there and take it and never fight back. I actually find this extremely encouraging that big meat, or whatever you want to call the big farming of meat production out there in the world, has decided to show up, and if not protest, at least find a way inside to tell the truth that that modern farming has made human life so much better, not just because steaks are delicious, but because the nutritional value that we're able to do through modern farming gives people longer lives, better lives, and is great for society all around.
So much of my life has been sustained by steaks, cheeseburgers, and ice cream. So I'm glad that they're finally defending themselves. I don't think that you can really defend yourself by adopting the language of the other side. Sustainable. What does that mean? It has no meaning. I would have a lot more respect for these people if they would just come out and say, this is junk science. Not because I have any particular interest in that phrase, but they could also use climate hoax. That would warm my heart. But there's no upside to defending yourself without defending yourself. And the meat industry is guilty of this. The oil industry is guilty of it. The coal industry, the car industry, and the car industry, of course, is now being screwed by Joe Biden and, trying to play the climate game. And it just doesn't work. None of this works. I'm under the impression, and from personal experience, when I first started doing this stuff 30 some odd years ago, there were still some businesses that like to work in reality, real science and real economics, and they would argue those things. Somewhere along the line, they just threw that all away and decided maybe we can surf these waves after all. And they really can't. It's just a disaster. The car companies, I think, are going to be, and EVs are going to be the textbook case for the disaster of industrial planning, central planning. But on the bright side, at least they're trying to do something.
Yeah, no, I like the fact, I agree with Steve 100% that I wish they hadn't adopted the language. It's like, oh, we're good too. Fred Smith had a statement about air pollution. What's the difference between a power plant with scrubbers? The comparison of a power plant with scrubbers and a child without a diaper and with a diaper. It's just how the emissions are captured, right? Well, here the meat is just buying into it, but they're trying to say we're good too. I haven't stopped beating my wife yet, but I'm beating her less often than I used to. So yeah. we're good too. But my suspicion is what they're doing there is trading sides of beef for barrels of oil. The deals in the back room, they're smoking the cigars and they're saying, we can deliver this much beef and pork. How much oil can we have?
Well, I'm really glad that I didn't have to be the one that comes in on this like a wet blanket, like I normally have to, because I just hate it when companies do this. When they come in and, as Sterling said, say, hey, we're good too, actually. It's too late. Meat companies, it's way too late for you to start trying to play this game. You've already sold your position, just like Exxon already sold their position away. When it comes to when things start actually passing in, or like when judges start erring on the side of the Greens in these lawsuits that they bring up all the time in order to just annoy the oil companies, usually when meat industry companies start getting dragged into this for climate change issues, they're already on record talking about how carbon emissions are killing the planet. Yeah. They've already sold their position. It's too late.
And we can't, I think we got to mention, we haven't mentioned, and I'm sure it's been done before, but so the issue with meat production and just livestock in general is methane. Of course, methane is irrelevant as a greenhouse gas. It has greenhouse gas properties, I guess, hypothetically in a laboratory maybe, but in the real atmosphere, it has, no discernible effect. I don't even know that regular CO2 emissions have a discernible effect, but certainly methane doesn't. And so this is just, much ado about nothing.
Right. Well, thanks, guys. That's very good comments. We're really having a lot of fun on this show, but we are going to start to round the fourth curve and come to the finish line here. So let's go to some questions. One of the questions here actually made me think of a tweet you had out a little bit ago. If you do not follow junk science on X/Twitter, you're missing out. Steve, I don't know how you get any of the work done. You tweet probably 400 times a day. Seems like you're always in my feed. It's good stuff.
I trained my cat.
Yeah. Your cat can dial 911 and also tweet for you. That's great. So here's the question from Guffpot. Question: this new SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, should it be mandatory for private jets going to the COP Jamboree? And apparently it costs a fortune. The tweet I was thinking about, Steve, I believe, was from you. They made this big announcement that a plane finally flew across the Atlantic, like Lindbergh or something, based on biofuel. Apparently, they glided into the some kind of historic thing. So, talk a little bit about so-called sustainable aviation fuel, which is a bit of a niche subject, but it's pretty interesting.
I think they flew in with only a 12% mix of biofuels, but it doesn't really matter. So biofuels are less efficient than conventional fuels. So when you use them, when you fly with them, you actually emit more because they're less efficient. They cost more, are less efficient. What's the upside to them? There is none. The aviation industry, they fall into the trap we just talked about in the last segment about corporations trying to play the climate game. They've tried carbon offsets to offset, their emissions. Of course, that doesn't really work. If nothing else, even if it were true that emissions were a problem, it takes forests 20 years to grow, but emissions come out immediately. And so there's just a mismatch there. The bottom line with the airline industry is that the only way for them to reduce emissions is by flying less. And they don't want to do that. So I guess they figured out that if they claim they're using sustainable aviation fuel, somehow stupid people are going to go, oh yeah, so there's fewer emissions. And that's just not true.
I don't know much about the aviation fuel that they're using, but what I do know about so-called sustainable fuels is that, for instance, biodiesel, it doesn't do well in cold temperatures. Now you're not going to use that in a jet, but I'm wondering if the biofuels, look, they got to get up there pretty high and it's cold up there. I wonder if that'll affect their operations. I don't want to fly on that airplane.
Well, that's why they only use. It's why they use a mix.
Well, as far as the mix, you talked about how long it takes to grow a forest, right? Well, my suspicion is they're not making these biofuels from a forest. No. They're making them from food stock,
right?
From corn, or from sugar cane, or from some other food product that could otherwise be going to feed people.
Right.
So they're basically trading fuel for food, and that's making food more expensive, and it's leading to fewer people being able to have access to affordable food.
Yeah, no. When I was talking about the forest, that was in the context of carbon offsets.
Right.
Like Delta Airlines was big into buying carbon offsets so that it could emit as much as it wanted flying, and so that's bad. So today, in the front page of the New York Times, there's a big article about how the ethanol industry is basically sucking out all the water out of the Midwest aquifers. And if they were to go to sustainable fuel, I mean, Sterling, you're right. You were burning food as fuel. It's unnecessary. There are people that are starving around the world.
Yeah, it's morally bankrupt.
Morally bankrupt, right? It's also unnecessarily depleting valuable groundwater in the Midwest. I mean, I can see draining groundwater to feed people. I can't see draining groundwater to fly airplanes. I mean, we have oil and conventional fuels for all that. It's just, it's another twisted, green result. And we are so far behind in educating people in what's what.
I'd love to see that. I'm sorry, Linnea.
You're good. You had something.
I was just going to say, I'd like to see, I'll believe them when the people at COP, the leaders, the elites, fly over to these places in an all-electric airplane. And by the way, I like them all packed into the same electric airplane. But then I'm not a kind person. So
What I was going to say is United tells you your like how much CO2 is emitted per flight now on your checkout, or when you're considering different flights to take, it now will tell you. So I guess now I really do pay a lot of attention to that, and I very much take my carbon dioxide emissions into account when I'm choosing flights. If there's two flights that are the same cost and neither of them are an inconvenient time, I will always pick the higher emissions one. But
So does Steve. Steve sometimes buys 2 tickets just to.
That's right.
Yeah. Joking aside, though, there are some environmentalists, and I've seen articles in The Guardian and also in, I believe, the Wall Street Journal that point out that even from the green perspective, biofuels are maybe the worst thing you could do, because not only do they take up a lot of land that can, it ends up pushing ranchers in South America further into like pristine jungle land and stuff when they take up more of the farmland for producing. Usually it's sugarcane down there. It's palm oil in the Pacific, and it's soybeans and corn in the United States. The corn ethanol, as far as I've been able to tell through the research that we do for Energy at a Glance, is probably one of the worst ones, because corn is pretty water hungry. And as Steve said, you know, if they're drawing down from aquifers, the problem is with this issue, it's really hard to get, like, this isn't even a political sides issue with the biofuels thing. Republicans love throwing money at ethanol subsidies just as much as Democrats do. So it's the biggest uphill battle to try to get people to turn. And I actually think that it's more likely that people on the left side of the aisle will turn on the ethanol subsidies before people on the right side of the aisle do. And then all of a sudden you'll get a bunch of Republican candidates who are talking about protecting the ethanol industry.
Yeah, things
Well,
go.
you know, I could accept it if people would just say, yes, we're paying them because they're politically important versus they're saving the planet. Which
Right, exactly.
Right. Well, we have one last question. I think this is a good one to go out on. It's by Ivan Hunter. All laughing aside, and thanks, Ivan. I'm glad you laughed and had a good time. That's part of the point of the show, is to have a good time. How do we stop this madness? And, you know, I think that's a good question. I think we ask it of ourselves a lot at the Heartland Institute and among our friends and allies and other organizations in the movement. And my theory is that, you know, a lot of the stuff that we talk about that's kind of nutty, you know, it's kind of on the fringe. It doesn't very much affect everybody's everyday life. It may affect some people's everyday life, but a lot of these ideas, for a long time, they could just, you know, write them off like, oh, those crazy people. Why, you know, they're using biofuels in their buses in San Francisco. If the virtue signal, they're telling you what your carbon footprint is when you're flying on United. My theory, guys, is that this madness ends when it starts to greatly impact people's actual lives, and that will result in kind of a revolution of sorts against this sort of madness. What do you think?
It's already greatly impacting people's lives, but they don't realize that that's what's impacting it. I mean, look, power is failing all over this country. It's due to climate policies. It's due to getting rid of coal. It's due to putting online more intermittent power. And until we can convince people that that's the real problem, it's not just, oh, the infrastructure's aging, oh, this, that, and the other. Until we can get the megaphone and convince people that they're already being negatively impacted and harmed by these policies, the madness won't end.
Well said. Yep. Good, Steve.
Yeah, no, a lot of what's going wrong in the world is because of green policies. Inflation, that is Joe Biden's decision to go, conduct war against fossil fuels. The war in Ukraine, I'll trace that right back to climate. You know, the climate idiocy that caused Germany to, start dependent on Russia and financing Russia, making it rich enough to go into Ukraine. There's a lot of, this green stuff has failed everywhere. It's been tried. It's only propped up by government subsidies. and I agree with Sterling that, once people see their standard of living declining, hopefully they'll dial into what the problem is. Of course, we also learned that during COVID, people just lose their minds when they believe there's some sort of emergency and they've got to listen to the government. So we've got our work cut out for us, no question about that.
We certainly do. And one way to help us with this work that's cut out for us, as I mentioned at the top of the show, is to support the Heartland Institute. You can go to heartland.org. There is a donate button. We'd love you to join our efforts to bring climate realism to the world. Another place you can learn more about climate realism is a website titled climaterealism.com. Sterling, Burnett, and Linnea contribute regularly to that. Sometimes we steal an article or two from Steve Milloy's junkscience.com and post it there as well. Visit all of those sites to get the truth about what's happening to our climate and arm yourselves for, frankly, the ideological war to come. Thank you so much for listening to the show this week, and we will talk to you next time.